And now, my friends on TalkSport and Talk, time for a truly remarkable tale from the Second World War that unfolded over 4 days in May 1940. It's a story that involves an England football player who broke his neck playing against Germany 10 years earlier, a ballet superstar who went on to dance with Rudolf Nureyev, a man who eventually played the child catcher in Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. Oh, and millions of pounds worth of diamonds as well. It reads like a thriller. It's all true. I told you it's a wild story, and it begins on Friday, May the 10th, when Nazi paratroopers began descending in their thousands on Holland. The Sky Blitz had begun, bringing death from above.
When the sun rose on that fateful day, the Nazis invaded the Netherlands. Without warning or the slightest provocation, they unleashed upon their innocent neighbor the full terror and fury of the devastating blitzkrieg. The force of the Luftwaffe was revealed to a shocked country. A purposeful army floated relentlessly down from the skies to penetrate hard-held lines of defense. Swiftly, they paralyzed communications and destroyed transportation. There was no stopping this ravaging horde. And when negotiations for surrender...
And that invasion involved almost 1 million troops, cost thousands of lives, and it also drew into it an unlikely band of Brits abroad who found themselves flung together in a desperate bid to flee the murderous mayhem that had engulfed them. Their story is told in a brilliant new book. As I say, it reads like a thriller, but it's all true, by Chris Hunt, who joins us now. The book is called Escape from Holland, published by Mile Away. I urge you to get hold of a copy. As we say, good morning and welcome to Chris Hunt, the author of Escape from Holland. Chris, at the heart of this story is almost a personal journey for you, and it involves a footballer that I've mentioned already. Tell us a bit, please, about how you first heard of this chap, Billy Marsden.
Well, my grandmother used to tell me about Billy Marsden, who was a cousin of hers. And she used to show me this sepia-tinted photo of him in his Sheffield Wednesday kit. At the time, I didn't even know it was Sheffield Wednesday kit. And she assured me he played for England, but I never believed her because I didn't believe anyone that was related to me could be good enough to play for England. And then years later, I was at the 2001 game in Munich between England and Germany, the 5-1 game.
Right.
And I was writing about it for a 442 magazine. And a German writer was writing about it from the German perspective, and he mentioned Billy Marsden breaking his neck in the 1930 game in his article. And
that was kind of ironically against Germany, and the Germans looked after him then. I mean, he'd had a tough start in life. I think he's one of 12 children, and it seemed he was going to end up working down the mines. He then signed for Sunderland. What kind of player was he? He was a defender, I think you say in the book. Is that right?
When he made the transition to professional football for Sunderland, he was inside right, but when he didn't really make it there because Charlie Buchan was firing in the goals for Sunderland. Later, Charles Buchan's Football Monthly, he went to Sheffield Wednesday and transferred there, and his manager changed him from a inside forward to a defensive midfielder, a left half.
Right, and what's fascinating about the book is he's over in Holland, as I used to call it, the Netherlands, I think they call it, the Low Countries, and he's involved in coaching and managing over there. Also over there at the same time you say in the book, which is bizarre to me, given that war had been declared the previous year, the Sadler's Wells Ballet Company, including Dame Margot Fontaine and Richard Helpman, who went on to play as Australian, went on to play the child catcher in Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. How did a ballet troupe end up touring that very dangerous-sounding part of the world in 1940? What was going on there?
Well, Holland was scrupulously neutral. They were shooting down RAF planes because they were trying to prove to the Germans they were neutral to try and get out of the war, really. And the British Council decided to send the Sadler's Wells Ballet Company on a tour of the Low Countries, and it was to go on into France the following week if the invasion of Holland hadn't happened.
Of course, we're talking about the year of Dunkirk as well, and a year when it seemed that the Nazis were unstoppable. And it seems from your book, we're talking to Chris Hunt, author of a great book called Escape from Holland, published by Mile Away, the dash for the last British boat out of Holland in May 1940. It is a thrilling true story, this one, folks. And, of course, they suddenly decide they need to get out of there, but they're also kind of involved in life. There's certainly Billy Marsden is. He's built his life over there. He's there with his wife. He's very worried about the people around him, but he can tell he needs to kind of escape and get out of town. And they suddenly hear about, there's a possibility of getting out on this boat, the Dotterel. And this comes down to somebody working, I think, in the British consulate in the book.
Well, it's Charles Dickens' grandson, who was the representative of the Admiralty in The Hague.
Yeah.
And the doctoral had been stuck in Rotterdam for 2 days after the invasion started, and managed to get out. It was the only English boat that got out. And instead of heading back across the channel to home, Charles Dickens' grandson commandeered the boat by phone and persuaded them to go up the. He had no, because it was a merchant navy boat. He had no authority to do so, and he persuaded them to go up the coast to Imugen to pick up the English people from the Amsterdam region. And
this is Rear Admiral Gerald Dickens. And also we've got in the book kind of characters who emerge, including one youngish man, and he's a young guy, I think his name's Alan Carter, who was a ballet dancer, but a keen footballer as well. And there's a wonderful account in the book of this kind of game he's involved in, and they're playing it in front of these gorgeous-sounding young ladies from the Sadler's Wells Ballet Corps.
What's even more bizarre, because Billy Marston turns up at this house later, who would have played at the World Cup in 1930 if England had been prepared to play it, but they didn't. They pulled out of the tournament because of their row with FIFA about admitting Germany back into world football. And the hotel that everyone used as a halfway house to get to the boat was used 2 years earlier as a training camp for the Uruguay team that went on to win the World Cup in 1930.
I know, it's astonishing. And then I mentioned Audrey Hepburn, who's kind of pops into the story as a very young woman, but also one of my favourite cinematographers turns up in the book as well, Douglas Slocum, who shot, the Italian Job, but a lot of Ealing comedies like The Living Hill, Kind Hearts and Coronets, and even the Robert Redford version, I think, of The Great Gatsby is over there. And there's one chap in particular who I think is almost worth a book on his own. Tell us, if you will, please, Chris, the story of Jack Reynolds, because he was then the Ajax football coach, but he ends up being interned as a prisoner in a Labour camp for pretty much the whole of the war. And there's even a rumour or report that he died. Of course, he didn't, thankfully.
Yes, that's right. Bob Glendenning was the Englishman who managed the Dutch national football team, and he was a friend of Jack Reynolds. And he tried to persuade Jack to come on the boat with him on the doctoral, but Jack had decided to stay with his Dutch wife, he'd been in Holland for 30 years then, and he decided to stay. And afterwards he got interned in a German camp, and there was this mysterious story that got out that he died, which didn't turn out to be true in the end.
And also, you mentioned Bob Glendenning, who was the coach of Holland's national team. He comes back from the war, reunited with his family in Bolton. He then dies of a heart attack, I think, in the November of 1940. But you say in the book, again, in the notes at the back, that his headstone, he died in the Manchester Hospital, is maintained by the Dutch Football Association. It's an amazing kind of the links in this book and the way that the war has thrown these people together, but the kind of memory, the echoes of their lives resonate down the decades. It's fascinating.
Yes, and you mentioned earlier about the things that they'd lost in. There was a 10 or 12 English football coaches working in Holland who were on the boats out, and one of the things that struck me about their escape was they were thinking about the things they'd lost, and it wasn't just mementos and football trophies. It was pension contributions and the things of everyday life.
The matter-of-fact things, which I suppose people focus on in the face of this kind of maelstrom of death and hideousness of horror in there. And there's also being, Holland, being Antwerp, there's also diamonds in the book. It does feel like a spy thriller, this book, folks.
Yes, just as the boat was about to sail, at the last minute, two Dutchmen turned up with what looked like 2 cigar boxes full of industrial diamonds that they said was worth £3 million. And the poor old Captain Joseph Green, who'd sailed his boat into a war zone to take 700 people home in 2 cargo holds lined with straw, he ended up with having to deliver £3 million worth of diamonds as well.
Let me ask you, Chris, about writing the book. How long did it take you to track down the stories of the many, many fascinating individuals, not all of them, known for connections with showbiz or whatever, but how long did it take you to actually research this? 15
years I worked on it, and I managed to track down 5 people while they were still living to interview, 2 of whom were over 100 at the time.
And I mentioned in my intro that it's a kind of occupation, because they're occupied until 1945, the Dutch, the people in the Low Countries, as they called it, Belgium, Luxembourg. I think Hitler committed something like 750,000 troops to it, and it was the first massive use of paratroopers in the war, but he also wreaked terrible devastation, because I think they pretty much destroyed the Nazis, didn't they, the heart of Rotterdam as part of the invasion.
Yes, but it was thankfully it was only Rotterdam largely. Amsterdam was kind of saved from that. I think on the Saturday of the weekend they bombed Schiphol Airport, but only 4 bombs fell on the centre of Amsterdam over the weekend.
And there's an amazing bit of synchronicity in that the German invasion begins on the 10th of May 1940. 10 years earlier to the day was when Billy Marsden suffered that terrible injury. Tell us a bit what happened to him, if you will, please. Now, the Germans effectively nursed him back to life.
Yes, his life was saved in the German hospital. He broke his spine, or had a bad spinal injury. They said a broken neck is what they described it as in those days. And he was rushed to a German hospital, and he spent 6 weeks in the German hospital with his head in a fierce-looking iron contraption to keep it still. And the German surgeon, whose son I tracked down in California, the German surgeon said that it was because he played on for the whole of the first half after injuring himself in the first 5 minutes that saved his life, probably.
Well, it sounds like the kind of Bert Troutman of English football.
Indeed. It's amazing that even though he broke his neck playing for England, it's amazing that few people remember him.
You've changed all that with this brilliant book. Our special guest this morning is our book of the week here on TalkSport and Talk, Escape from Holland, the dash for the last British boat out of Holland in May 1940, a thrilling true story of football, ballet, journalism, diamonds and war by Chris Hunt, published by a mile away. Make sure you get hold of a copy, because as I say, reads like a thriller. And Chris was talking to me, Paul Austin, you guys on TalkSport and on Talk, where we're live till 5.